She smiled at me, patted my hand, and said in sweet, perfect English, "Drink your tea, Dad." Then she turned to her mother and hissed in Spanish, "I hope this old bastard kicks the bucket before we get the money, or I might have to speed things up." She didn't know I built houses on the Texas border for 20 years. She didn't know I understand every single word. I'm 68 years old. 2 months ago, I had a minor stroke. It slowed my walk and slurred my speech for a few weeks, but my mind? My mind is as sharp as a tack. But to my son Mark and his new wife Isabella, I'm just a piece of furniture. A broken ATM waiting to be emptied. They look at me and see a helpless invalid. They have no idea that the confused old man in the armchair is recording every conversation they have. If you enjoy stories about karma striking back at the people who deserve it most, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You do not want to miss the revenge I have planned for this family. They moved me into the guest room of the house I actually paid for. Technically, the deed is in Mark's name, a wedding gift I gave them 3 years ago. Big mistake. I sit in my armchair by the window most days, staring at the garden. I let my jaw hang a little loose. I purposefully spill a drop of coffee now and then. I play the part of the failing, senile old man perfectly. Why? Because it makes them careless. When they think I'm checking out of reality, they show me exactly who they really are. Isabella is the worst. She treats me like a toddler when Mark is in the room, using that high-pitched, fake nursing voice. But the moment he leaves for work, I become a burden, a nuisance. She invites her mother, Maria, over almost every day. They sit on the sofa, not 10 feet from me, drinking my expensive wine and talking about me like I'm a stray dog they can't wait to take to the pound. They speak in rapid-fire Spanish. They think it's their secret code. They think because I'm a white contractor who spent his life pouring concrete and framing houses, I only know English. What they don't realize is that you don't spend 2 decades running construction crews in San Antonio without picking up the language. I speak it better than Mark does. I understand the slang, the insults, and the whispers. Yesterday, Isabella was on the phone. I heard her say, "The doctor said he could live another 10 years. I can't wait that long, Mama. We need to sell his old property now, before he realizes what's happening." I gripped the armrest of my chair, but I didn't blink. I just stared at the wall and let out a shaky breath. Let them think they have already won. They don't know that the war has just begun. The atmosphere shifted the day Maria, Isabella's mother, arrived. They call her La Víbora, the viper, behind her back in her own family, and I could immediately see why. Maria was a woman carved out of granite, all sharp edges and icy contempt. Her arrival signaled that this wasn't just my daughter-in-law's private greed. This was a coordinated family operation, and I was the target. She moved in, supposedly to help with my care, but really to supervise Isabella and ensure the execution of their plan. That evening, Mark, my son, joined the women for dinner. This was the moment that truly broke something inside me. We sat at the dining table, a mahogany antique I had restored myself, and I was served a bland, overcooked piece of fish. Isabella and Maria started their Spanish exchange immediately. They were bold, practically shouting across the table, confident that the gringo couldn't understand them. "Mira, está comiendo como un perro viejo. Apesta a naftalina," Maria sneered, pointing her fork at me. "Look, he's eating like an old dog. He stinks of mothballs." I just kept chewing slowly, my eyes focused on the plate, pretending to be utterly lost in my own fog. Then the true wound opened. They started discussing the sale of my old house, my first home. They debated what kind of kitchen they could afford to put into their house, the one I gifted them, with the profits. Isabella said. Dile a Mark que el dinero es nuestro. Si él lo gasta, ella no verá ni un centavo. Tell Mark the money is ours. If he spends it, she won't see a single cent. And my son, Mark? He sat there. He understood some Spanish, enough to know the gist of the conversation, and certainly enough to catch the tone. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, fiddled with his napkin, and occasionally gave me a quick, worried glance. But he never defended me. He never told them to stop. His silence was an agreement, a betrayal written in expensive wine and fish dinner. It was in that moment I knew my revenge couldn't just be about money. It had to be about public humiliation and complete destruction of their comfort. I had to make them feel every bit as worthless and trapped as they intended to make me feel. The next day, I didn't forget to accidentally drop my house key, the key to my old, untouched safe deposit box, in a very obvious spot near my armchair, just waiting for Isabella to find it. I had replaced the original key the night before, of course, but they didn't know that. I needed them to think they had the advantage. I needed them to take the bait. I escalated my performance. The goal was to make them completely confident in my mental decline. I started calling Isabella by my deceased wife's name, Sarah, which always made her face tighten with annoyance. I'd wander into the kitchen and stare into the open fridge, asking, "Who are all these strangers?" when Maria and Isabella were present. Mark would just sigh and shake his head, which confirmed to the women that I was spiraling down fast. Isabella took the bait I left out. She found the safe deposit box key I had dropped. I was watching television, pretending to be asleep, when I saw her snatch it off the rug near the armchair. Her eyes glittered with pure, unadulterated greed. She pocketed it without a word, glancing at me to ensure I hadn't noticed. Perfect. The fake key confirmed her belief that I was too far gone to manage my affairs, and she now held the key to my presumed fortune. Later that afternoon, they settled onto the patio, which was thankfully just outside my open window. It was time for the next step. I had a tiny, voice-activated recorder that I used to keep notes during my contracting days. It was disguised as a simple USB drive. I placed it discreetly on the shelf behind my chair, where it was perfectly positioned to catch the sound, but invisible to a casual glance. Their conversation immediately focused on the numbers. Isabella was reviewing documents she must have stolen from my study. 500,000, mamá. Eso es lo que podemos sacar del mercado de valores ahora mismo. 500,000, Mom. That's what we can pull out of the stock market right now. Maria clicked her tongue impatiently. No seas estúpida. Necesitas más, she insisted. Don't be stupid. You need more. They talked about my bank accounts, my retirement funds, and the equity in my old home. The most shocking detail was their detailed argument over how to split the money. Isabella insisted on 70% because she was doing the heavy lifting, i.e., putting up with my presence, while Maria demanded 50% for her expert advice and for finding the perfect place for me. The perfect place. That phrase was like a cold knife twisting in my stomach. The way they spoke about these hundreds of thousands of dollars, my life savings, was the same way I might discuss buying new tires for my truck. It was detached, calculating, and utterly devoid of human feeling. But I didn't move. I remained the statue in the armchair. I needed every word, every callous laugh recorded. I needed proof that went beyond just my word against theirs. This recording would be the anchor of my revenge. The next morning brought the true horror. Maria and Isabella sat at the kitchen island, spreading out brochures that looked cheap and depressing. The little USB recorder, still hidden, was drinking up every word. The topic wasn't just my money anymore. It was my final destination. Isabella laid out the final brochure. Este es el más barato, mamá. Un asilo de ancianos del estado. La gente se va muy rápido aquí. This one is the cheapest, Mom. A state nursing home. People leave very quickly here. The way she said, "leave very quickly," sent a shiver down my spine, even though I was playing deaf. I imagined the place, understaffed, smelling of bleach and despair. A place where my life savings would be untouched while I slowly faded away, abandoned. Maria looked over the details. Perfecto. Es feo, pero funciona. No queremos que dure 10 años, ¿verdad? El dinero es para nosotros, no para enfermeras. Perfect. It's ugly, but it works. We don't want him to last 10 years, right? The money is for us, not for nurses. They were, laughing, giggling like schoolgirls planning a trip, while discussing my slow death. My son Mark walked in then, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He saw the brochures. He immediately looked uncomfortable. "What's all this?" he asked, in English. Isabella quickly answered him, switching languages seamlessly. "It's just some options, honey, to give Dad a little more structure and social interaction. The doctor recommended it." Mark hesitated. He looked at the glossy photo of a dreary building. "Are you sure about this one? It looks rough." Maria jumped in, Spanish again, completely dismissing her son-in-law. "Cállate, muchacho. Ya está hecho. Solo tienes que firmar la documentación de ingreso la semana que viene." "Shut up, boy. It's already done. You just have to sign the admission papers next week." Mark didn't argue. He just took a piece of toast, mumbled something about a big meeting, and left the room. That was the last straw. The fact that he was willing to condemn me to that misery, knowing it was wrong, all for a piece of the pie, sealed his fate alongside theirs. They were signing my death warrant. I realized I had no time left. It was time to stop playing the invisible man and start moving my pieces. I needed to get out, unnoticed, and secure my assets before they made their final, irreversible move. It was time for the invisible man to disappear for a few hours. This required surgical precision. I timed my escape for the early afternoon, right after Maria and Isabella finished their midday gossip session and settled down for their usual siesta, believing me to be napping in my chair. I quietly slipped out the back door, using a small, rarely used side path that kept me hidden from the front street and any nosy neighbors. Once I was a block away, I hailed a cab. I didn't dare drive myself. That would be too much of a physical exertion risk for a man recovering from a stroke, and I couldn't risk them finding my car missing. My destination was the office of my longtime friend, David. David was the sharpest estate lawyer in the state, and we had played poker together every Thursday for 30 years. He was the only person who knew the full scope of my assets and, crucially, the specific, old-school legal structure I had put in place years ago to protect my family, and now to defend myself from them. When David saw me walk in, looking sharp in my old suit, he nearly fell out of his chair. "Frank, I thought you were confined to a rocking chair," he exclaimed. I just smiled, a real smile this time. The reports of my cognitive demise have been greatly exaggerated, my friend. Let's get to work. We spent 3 grueling hours finalizing the traps. First, we changed my will, explicitly disinheriting Mark and leaving everything to a medical research foundation, unless he could prove he was unaware of the plot to institutionalize me,
which my recordings would disprove. Second, we activated the
security measures on the bank accounts. David sent immediate notification to the banks, freezing all access under the pretext of suspected elder financial abuse. But the real masterpiece was the house. Mark and Isabella believed the deed was clean. They were wrong. The house was technically held in a specific type of trust that allowed me, as the original grantor, to revoke occupancy rights under certain conditions. David drew up the eviction notice, a formal, legally binding document demanding they vacate the premises within 24 hours due to material breach of the trust agreement. They lived in my house, and they had forgotten the fine print. I signed the papers with a steady hand, a feeling of cold, quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. The counterattack was fully armed. Returning to the house after my meeting with David was surreal. It was like stepping back onto a stage where I was the main actor, but my lines were those of a docile, fading old man. I deliberately made a little noise coming back in, just enough for Isabella to hear. When she came to check on me, I was back in my armchair, pretending to be disoriented, mumbling about a dream. She just rolled her eyes and left, satisfied. The next day, the moment I had anticipated arrived. Isabella approached me with a stack of papers, her smile wider than usual. It was a predatory smile, full of triumph. "Dad," she cooed, her voice sickly sweet, "the doctors need you to sign some forms, just routine stuff, for your comfort and care." I took the pen she offered, a cheap plastic thing, and looked at the documents. They were indeed power of attorney forms, authorizing her to manage my finances and medical decisions. She thought she was finally closing the net. She believed she was about to legally steal my entire life. I feigned confusion, holding the pen awkwardly. "My hand, it's a bit shaky today, dear," I mumbled, my voice raspy. "Where do I sign?" She pointed impatiently to the lines. "Just here, Dad. Your signature, nice and clear." But I didn't give her a nice and clear signature. Instead, I carefully scrawled a series of shaky, almost illegible squiggles. It looked like the work of a child, or a man whose motor skills were entirely gone. It was just convincing enough to look like a genuine attempt from a senile old man, but absolutely useless in any court of law. I made sure to miss the precise lines, and my signature was more of a symbol than a name. I even let out a small, tired sigh when I finished, as if the effort had exhausted me. Isabella snatched the papers back, barely concealing her glee. She barely glanced at the illegible scrawl, so confident was she in her victory. She just shoved them into a folder, patted my arm condescendingly and said, "There, all done, Dad. You just rest now." She gave me a triumphant look, a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk that said, "You're mine now." Little did she know, those papers were worthless, just another piece of bait. My real signature, the one that controlled my actual fortune, was safely tucked away with David. This charade simply solidified their belief that they had me exactly where they wanted me, helpless, signed over, and ready for the final act of their betrayal. With the seemingly valid power of attorney forms in hand, Isabella and Maria became giddy with anticipation. They were convinced I was signed, sealed, and soon to be delivered to the state home. The tension in the house for me was agonizing, but for them it was a celebratory fever pitch. They started planning the grand finale, a farewell dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, the kind of place they couldn't normally afford. "Necesitamos una cena elegante para mostrarles a todos lo cariñosos que somos," Maria declared one afternoon, not even bothering to lower her voice. "We need an elegant dinner to show everyone how caring we are." They were inviting extended family, cousins and uncles, people who were genuinely fond of me. The whole point was to put on a public display of dutiful daughter before shipping me off. I watched Isabella meticulously choose her outfit for the dinner. A brand new dress she probably charged to one of the joint credit cards they hadn't yet realized I'd frozen. She spent an hour in front of the mirror, practicing her tearful, compassionate expression. It was a masterpiece of cold hypocrisy. Mark, my son, seemed less celebratory. He was nervous, shuffling his feet and avoiding my gaze. One evening, he tried to approach me while I was napping. He stood by my chair for a long time, and I could sense his internal struggle. He opened his mouth, as if to confess or apologize. But then Isabella's voice cut in from the hallway, sharp and impatient. "Mark, hurry up! We need to choose the appetizers for the dinner." He flinched, gave me a quick, empty look of pity, and retreated. He was a captured soldier, too weak to fight his captors. The scheduled date for my admission to the nursing home was set for Monday morning. The dinner was Sunday night. Their plan was simple: celebrate, toast the good fortune, and then quietly drop me at the facility before sunrise. I finished my last piece of preparation, retrieving the tiny USB recorder. I carefully transferred the audio files, the proof of their plot, the insults, the discussions about poisoning, onto a secure cloud drive, and then onto my phone. The weapon was loaded. The stage was set. I just had to survive the dinner. Sunday night arrived, and the atmosphere in the expensive downtown restaurant was thick with false sentiment. Mark, Isabella, Maria, and about 6 distant relatives I hadn't seen in years were gathered around a massive round table. I was wheeled in by Mark, looking frail and small, wearing a suit I hadn't worn since my wife's funeral. My job for the next hour was simple: be the silent, pathetic centerpiece of their performance. Isabella was magnificent in her hypocrisy. She gave a tearful toast in English, her voice cracking just right. "To my wonderful father-in-law, Frank. We are so blessed to have him, and we want nothing more than his comfort and peace in this next stage of his life." The relatives nodded sympathetically, completely taken in. Maria even dabbed her eye with a napkin, a true masterclass in deceit. But the moment they switched back to Spanish, the mask dropped. They were sitting right next to me. "Dios mío, esto es agotador. Mark se ve terrible. ¿Cree que debería darle un trago?" Isabella muttered to her mother. "My God, this is exhausting. Mark looks terrible. Do you think I should give him a drink?" Maria replied, loud enough for me to hear over the clinking of glasses. "Déjalo. No es el plato fuerte. Mañana a esta hora, el abuelo estará en el basurero y estaremos libres." "Forget him. He's not the main course. By this time tomorrow, the grandfather will be in the garbage dump, and we'll be free." That phrase, the garbage dump, referring to the cheap nursing home they'd picked out, almost made me physically ill. But I held my composure. I watched the expensive wine being poured, the fancy appetizers being passed around, all paid for with the money they believed was already theirs. They were celebrating my demise. They were toasting their imminent theft. I sat there, sipping my water, listening to the laughter and the cruel whispers, feeling the weight of the entire performance. The other relatives genuinely liked me, making their betrayal even colder. They truly thought they were getting away with the perfect crime, that my incapacity was their golden ticket. The time for acting was almost over. The only thing separating this horrible, cynical feast from their complete and total ruin was the arrival of the waiter to take the main course order. That was my cue. I silently reached into my pocket and touched the smooth glass of my phone, the weapon loaded with proof. The waiter, a young man who looked slightly overwhelmed by the size of our party, approached the table. He was ready to take the main course order. Isabella was about to tell him her choice in English when I raised my hand, a gesture I hadn't made in weeks. Everyone, including the waiter, froze. I cleared my throat, straightened my back, and met Isabella's eyes. Her triumphant smirk instantly faded, replaced by confusion. I spoke, not in the slurred, confused English they were used to, but in smooth, perfect, formal Spanish, with the Texas drawl I hadn't used in years. "Disculpe, joven. ¿Podría pedirle un favor?" I asked the waiter. "Quiero que me traiga el oso buco de ternera, y por favor, dígale al chef que lo prepare sin el toque de canela. No me gusta la canela en los platos de carne." "Excuse me, young man. Could I ask you a favor? I want you to bring me the veal osso buco, and please, tell the chef to prepare it without the hint of cinnamon. I don't like cinnamon in meat dishes." The silence was deafening. The waiter stared. Isabella and Maria looked like statues carved from ice, their faces completely white. They had just spent months calling me senile, worthless, and too stupid to speak their language, and I had just ordered a complex dish in their mother tongue, critiquing the spice content. "Frank, what are you doing?" Mark finally stammered, his face a mixture of fear and dawning realization. I smiled, a cold, hard smile that reached none of my eyes. I switched back to English, but my voice was firm, resonant, and nothing like the meek whisper they knew. "I'm just proving a point, son. The cinnamon in the osso buco. It's too much, Isabella. Just like your greedy planning was too much." I looked directly at her. "You thought I was sleeping in my chair, while you planned to put me in a home and split my savings. You didn't know I speak Spanish, too." Then I delivered the fatal blow. I pulled out my phone. For those of you who missed the daily Spanish lessons, let me provide the transcript. I hit play. The tiny speaker filled the expensive restaurant with Maria's loud, sneering voice. "Mañana a esta hora, el abuelo estará en el basurero y estaremos libres." By this time tomorrow, the grandfather will be in the garbage dump and will be free. The sound hung in the air, sickeningly clear. The distant relatives gasped, turning their horrified faces toward Isabella and Maria. I didn't stop there. I raised my voice one last time. "That garbage dump is off limits. Your power of attorney papers are worthless, signed by a man you considered incompetent. All my accounts were blocked 2 days ago. And Mark?" I turned to my son, whose head was bowed in shame. "You and your wife are living in my trust-owned property. David, my lawyer, is currently serving you both with an eviction notice. You have 24 hours to vacate. Enjoy the last supper you stole from me." The aftermath of that evening was exactly as chaotic and painful as I had planned. The restaurant staff had to intervene as Isabella and Maria started screaming at each other in Spanish, their expensive dinner forgotten. The extended family members, appalled by the recording, quickly packed up their pity and left, offering me muttered apologies on their way out. I sat there, exhausted but utterly vindicated, until David arrived to drive me away. Mark was utterly broken. He tried to plead with me later that night, calling my phone, sobbing about how he was confused and pressured. I hung up. His confusion cost me my peace and nearly cost me my life. He chose greed over his father, and now he had to live with the consequences. The eviction notice landed the next morning. Since their cash flow was frozen and they had no savings, they couldn't afford to fight it or rent a new place. Isabella and Maria were left completely destitute. The recordings were sent to my lawyer, who made sure the banks fully understood the elder abuse aspect. The last I heard, Isabella and Mark filed for a messy, angry divorce, with Isabella blaming Mark for not checking the property trust details. Mark lost everything, and his career took a fatal hit from the public scandal that eventually followed. As for me, I sold the old house and moved into a beautiful new condo overlooking the ocean. I hired a fantastic, kind caregiver who only speaks English, just to keep things simple. I started traveling, something my late wife and I always dreamed of doing. I just returned from a 2-week trip to the Mediterranean, and next month I'm planning a visit to Alaska. My life isn't just comfortable, it's vibrant. I'm thriving, free from the darkness they tried to drown me in. I'm no longer the invisible man. I'm the man who got his life back. Now, I want to turn this over to you. Considering the depth of their betrayal, the sheer cruelty of their plan to put me in that horrible home, did I do the right thing? What would you have done in my place when faced with that kind of cold, calculated family betrayal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed seeing professional revenge served ice cold like this, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming true stories and intense revenge plots. The end. Thank you for listening.